Today's program is brought to you by Ground News. I want you to imagine a state. Maybe it looks like this, or this, or this, doesn't really matter. Now, imagine that this is a very wicked state, not because of any immutable characteristic or religion of the people who inhabit it, but because it's built on and sustained by genocide, apartheid, and ethno-supremacy. Now, imagine the type of individuals or organizations that would stoop so low as to defend such a state, to whitewash its ethnic massacres and its very raison d'etre of maintaining racial homogeneity within its borders. One such organization is none other than the infamous Anti-Defamation League, also known as the ADL. The ADL is a New York-based NGO with 25 regional offices in the US, one of which being a government relations office in DC, staff members in Europe, and a dedicated office in Israel. It was founded in the early 1900s in response to anti-Semitism and quickly laid out its mission statement: to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. For a time, the ADL engaged in genuinely respectable activities. In its early years, it mobilized against the notorious anti-Semite Henry Ford and his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, leading to the paper's cancellation. In the 1930s, it worked to monitor and counteract domestic pro-Nazi groups and later campaigned for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, despite simultaneously engaging in actions that directly contradicted these efforts, but we'll get into that later. This early conduct helped the ADL build its reputation and paved the way for it to become a 501c3. A charitable, nonprofit advocacy organization exempt from paying federal income tax on revenue tied to its stated mission. However, the ADL also carries a dark and twisted past, one completely incompatible with its mission statement about securing justice for all, and directly contradictory to its self-identification as a civil rights and advocacy organization. I'll be upfront about what this video is. It's an exploration of the central tension between the organization's stated goal of humanism and fair treatment for all, and its contradictory alignment with state power to serve its aggressive political ambitions. This is a story of what happens when one prioritizes not the well-being of all people, but the pursuit of power and the interests of a single nation-state and its ideology of Zionism, while claiming to care for everyone, and the corruption, brown-nosing, and betrayal that inevitably follow. We'll dive into all of that in this video. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Ground News is a website and app that shows you how a story is being covered across the political spectrum, letting you quickly compare and contrast how narratives differ between opposing sides. Take this story about J.D. Vance heading to Israel to reinforce the supposed ceasefire. The contrast in reporting is striking, even just from the headlines. Left-leaning outlets don't shy away from describing the Trump-backed ceasefire agreements as fragile and unstable, while right-leaning outlets use words like bolster and stabilize to frame the deal as something that's working, but might just need a little reinforcement. I like to pay extra attention to these word choices because they often give the game away and tacitly reveal the motives of the outlets involved. Ground News also shows you each outlet's factuality, ownership details, as well as which side of the political spectrum is predominantly covering a story, so you can check whether it's being properly represented. And if you're worried about missing something, as I often am, the Blind Spot feed highlights stories your usual outlets might have ignored. Because of this, I've partnered with Ground News to get you 40% off the same Vantage plan I use. Just go to groundnews.com/over, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link below to get started for under $6 a month. Now let's get back to the video. Today, the ADL is unequivocally known for its pro-Israel advocacy. While it only began prioritizing Israel in the late 60s and early 70s, the organization has always been deeply loyal to the US state, both before and since. The ADL understands that by cozying up to state power, it's more efficient in achieving its political agenda. The organization itself openly states that one of its major contemporary efforts is to counter so-called anti-Israel activity. The irony isn't lost on me that a supposed humanitarian civil rights group rides this hard for a racist apartheid state and does so by lobbying the government and labeling anti-Zionists as anti-Semites. But I digress. We'll circle back to that later. When an organization maintains both a major lobbying presence at home and an international office dedicated to a foreign state and explicitly defines political activity related to that state as a primary concern, its priorities inevitably shift. The universal goal of securing justice for all becomes replaced by the geopolitical goal of defending Israel's image and policy interests in the US. As a result, the ADL has transformed from an organization claiming to safeguard the safety and reputation of American Jews into a political instrument fundamentally concerned with protecting the security and diplomatic standing of the State of Israel. In order to better understand how it does this, we need to briefly touch on how it makes and spends its money. The ADL makes its money through individual contributions, grants, donations, and things of that nature. It also has a sister foundation, the ADLF, which is tasked with managing and investing the ADL's endowments, trusts, funds, and other assets. The ADLF also operates in part as a donor-advised fund and ultimately works to funnel more money the ADL's way and keep the organization going. Think of it as a fundraising arm. The ADL also enjoys funding from high-profile donors. Major corporate backing has poured in from companies like JP Morgan, Uber, Apple, and even the CEO of 21st Century Fox threw $1 million the ADL's way back in 2017. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense why these big corporations obsessed with their public image and reputation donate to a supposed civil rights organization. See, that's the power of the ADL. It can appeal to the liberal side of the aisle by flexing its supposed aspirations toward human rights and equality, while also appealing to neoconservatives like the staunchly Zionist Adelson Family Foundation due to its uncompromising support for Israel. This bipartisan funding allows the ADL to position itself strategically, giving it influence on both sides of the aisle when pursuing its legislative agenda in Washington. Which brings us to how the ADL spends its money. A significant portion of the ADL's budget goes toward paying its staff, and it pays them handsomely. Now, as a socialist, there are few things I enjoy more than seeing a well-paid, well-cared-for staff, but leave it to the ADL to make me bitch about that too. In 2023, the ADL CEO and National Director, Jonathan Greenblatt, made over $1 million, including over $185,000 in bonus and incentive compensation. And he's not the only staff member to receive such a bonus. These performance-based incentives, combined with the ADL's explicit focus on pro-Israel activism by way of lobbying the government, expanding its media footprint, suppressing anti-Zionist voices, and so forth, suggest that compensation is directly tied to staff members' ability and eagerness to achieve the organization's political goals. In other words, the ADL employees are likely financially encouraged to act aggressively and prioritize pro-Israel outcomes above all else. On top of that, the ADL pours massive amounts of money into influencing federal policy. Just in one quarter, quarter two of 2025, it reported spending $360,000 on lobbying alone. That's a lot of influence over how policies are shaped. While I have this lobbying report loaded up, let's take a look at what exactly the ADL has been gunning for this year. We've got House Resolution 521, standing with Israel as it works to dismantle Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities and defends itself against Iranian attacks on civilians, as well as House Resolution 2346, the Accountability for Terrorist Perpetrators of October 7th Act, seeking to provide legislative backing and secure funding for Israel's objectives. Then there's Senate Resolution 72, affirming that Hamas cannot retain any political or military control in the Gaza Strip. Kind of a weird thing for an American organization to give a shit about. There's also House Resolution 3050, the Countering Hate Against Israel by Federal Contractors Act, which prohibits federal agencies from contracting companies engaged in a boycott of Israel. And the list goes on, trust me, we will bring this back up in a bit. As you can probably tell by now, this is the real goal and function of the ADL. It's to enforce the prioritization of Israel. They euphemize this by claiming to fight anti-Semitism, and then they tack on a phrase about also opposing injustice wherever it may occur. But as I hope you can see, this is just a marketing ploy. The ADL cares solely about Zionism. Even when it comes to anti-Zionist Jews, the ADL demonizes them and sides with Israel. Whatever good intentions the ADL may have had at its inception, its function today subordinates any stated goal of justice for all to defending Israel. It is fundamentally concerned with the security and diplomatic reputation of the State of Israel. But how does an organization that presents itself as an American civil rights group secure legitimacy in the public eye when its main goal is defending an ethnocracy on the other side of the planet? Especially at a time when large swaths of the population are coming to terms with the brutality of the Israeli state and the apartheid and genocide it commits against Palestinians. Well, See, the ADL and other like-minded opportunists understand one crucial thing. The Jewish people have been wrongfully persecuted throughout history, and anti-Semitism is a vile malignancy. So, when it comes time to defend the ethno-supremacist project of Zionism, weaponized accusations of anti-Semitism can buy the project some time before the walls cave in and the state of Israel loses its legitimacy. But as Israeli historian Shlomo Sand reminds us, the oppressed of yesterday are not necessarily always the oppressed of today. History serves only too often as an arena in which the roles of hunter and hunted, strong and weak, are shuffled around. See, the uncomfortable truth is that today, systemic, institutionalized anti-Semitism is not a serious threat. On the contrary, in the US, you can literally lose access to grants, loans, and development funds over supposed anti-Semitism just for criticizing the state of Israel. Or worse, you could be wrongfully arrested. If a politician in, say, the US, Canada, or Germany ran on a genuinely anti-Semitic platform, they would not have a prosperous career. Meanwhile, Islamophobia is widely accepted. We live in a time where elected officials openly refer to their Muslim American contemporaries with racially charged nicknames while calling for their deportation. If this sort of attack was levied against a Jewish American mayoral candidate, we, rightfully, would never hear the end of it. Anti-Palestinianism in particular is a bigotry that has demonstrable effects. Thousands upon thousands are killed, their land stolen, and they are subjected to apartheid, all while our Western governments support their tormentors both morally and financially, while manufacturing the narrative that the oppressors are actually the oppressed. What the fuck? Now, does this mean that anti-Semites don't exist? Of course not. They just don't hold institutional power the way anti-Palestinian racists, Islamophobes, and anti-Arab racists more broadly do. And even when a Western political actor does say or do something that could be seen as anti-Semitic, A, they are quickly shamed into walking it back, and B, they still support the state of Israel. And in the eyes of the Zionist, that's really all that matters.
We have to talk to Iran. He's not an enemy. He's a friend.
Again, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as anti-Semitism. I'm not even saying that there are no anti-Semites holding institutional positions. There are. I'm just saying that out and about open anti-Semitism is shunned and reprimanded wherever it rears its ugly head in a way that Islamophobia is not. Case in point, when the Young Republicans had their anti-Semitic chat logs leaked in October of 2025, the shapely young ladies responsible were immediately punished and forced to resign from their positions, which is good. Andy Ogles, on the other hand, has yet to face any comparable penalization. Now, you may think that this reality, the fact that anti-Semitism is so institutionally unacceptable, is a good thing. I know I do. But if you're an institution that thrives off the existence of anti-Semitism, as the ADL is and as Zionism in general does, this reality becomes quite inconvenient. All those millions of dollars coming in every year for you to fight anti-Semitism, those only pour in so long as anti-Semitism poses a real systemic threat. Oh, and that precious ethno-state of yours. How are you supposed to weaponize accusations of anti-Semitism to deflect from criticism of its behavior? How do you deal with the reality that anti-Semitism just isn't a major institutional or systemic threat when your project and livelihood depend on it being one? Well, you start playing with definitions and blurring the lines between concepts until you get to the point where criticizing an active genocidal settler colony in the Middle East constitutes anti-Semitism. While I'm on the topic, let's take another look at the ADL's lobbying efforts for Q2 of 2025. We can see them advocate for House Resolution 1007, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2025, which seeks to legislate the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's, the IHRA's, working definition of anti-Semitism into federal oversight mechanisms. At first glance, that doesn't really seem like a big deal. Anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers are disgusting, and an organization that has Holocaust remembrance in its name couldn't possibly be compromised, right? So what exactly does the IHRA consider to be anti-Semitism? Oh, shit. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Which it is a racist endeavor. Read the 2018 nation-state law or the writings of Zionism's pioneers. Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, which can accurately and easily be done. I hope you guys see the issue with this. Do you understand how absurd it is to claim that calling out Israel as a perpetrator of apartheid is anti-Semitic? Or to insist that the racist, ethno-supremacist ideology of Zionism shouldn't be compared to the Nazis who had a similar ethno-supremacist project of their own? These are entirely apt observations, yet the IHRA considers them anti-Semitic, and the ADL seeks to codify their baseless and flawed logic into law. And Greenblatt, the ADL CEO, is relentless in his quest to push this narrative that anti-Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic. We can see him deploy this sleight of hand when he makes the rounds on outlets ranging from smaller podcasts like this one.
I will not sit with anti-Zionists because anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
All the way over to MSNBC.
And if you wouldn't tolerate it, if someone is wearing a swastika on their arm, I'm sorry, you shouldn't tolerate it if they're wearing a keffiyeh on their neck.
And CNN.
This gamer, Hassan Piker, who regularly employs awful genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people in the Jewish state.
Israel's doing this, yes.
The Jews.
Well, Israel's doing it. It's not the Jews doing
Jewish
it.
people, right?
No, it's not.
They're not.
So one thing you have to understand is that
a difference?
There
Enlighten
is
me, 'cause
a
I'm just
major
asking.
difference, because like what Saudi Arabia does is not about Islam. You know, it's not like ISIS is doing what they're doing for Islam. You know what I mean? I'm
Okay.
Muslim. I don't those guys.
Gamer, Hassan Piker, who regularly employs awful genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people.
By controlling the definition of hate and what constitutes anti-Semitism, the ADL is able to secure their political influence and financial well-being. This allows them to leverage institutional authority and potential federal funding restrictions to serve their real agenda, not the defense of civil liberty, but the suppression of anyone who opposes the ethnocratic apartheid regime of Israel, including anti-Zionist Jews. This so-called civil rights organization prioritizes defending apartheid, denying genocide, and securing provisions for and laundering the image of the state perpetrating these crimes. As a result, the ADL finds itself in a position where its main opponents aren't even the Nazis or white supremacists they claim to be fighting, but the left-wing anti-apartheid activists who actually pose a real threat to the ADL's racist objectives, as we will soon see. Because of this, the ADL finds itself wrapped up with unlikely right-wing bedfellows like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and even Christian evangelicals who want to send Jews to Palestine to fulfill their apocalyptic prophecies of the second coming of the Messiah. We don't even need to mention that in this prophecy, all the Jews get damned to hell. Oh well. As long as these evangelicals support Israel, right? I think I've successfully made my point and illustrated how and why the ADL functions the way it does in the modern day, and how and why it hides behind and weaponizes a real bigotry, anti-Semitism, to defend another bigotry, Zionism. But this, as well as its lobbying efforts, are not the end-all be-all. The ADL's full, reprehensible legacy is rarely explored, and yet the ADL continues to benefit from being seen as a civil rights organization. So let's roll back the clock and expose the real ADL. Back during the Second Red Scare, also known as the McCarthy era, when a mere accusation of holding communist sympathies could destroy a person's reputation, the ADL publicly positioned itself as opposing McCarthyism. It criticized McCarthyist tactics and claimed to stand against the crackdown on political dissent and the consequent atmosphere of paranoia this created. In practice, however, the ADL's actions often contradicted its public stance. It worked with the House Un-American Activities Committee, an investigative body that would look into whether or not private American citizens were disloyal to the state or had communist ties. Definitely something that should exist in a so-called free, democratic country. The ADL also purged Jewish communists from its organization, proving once again that it has no problems throwing Jews under the bus in its attempts to cozy up to state power. It even supported the highly controversial execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, two Jewish Americans accused of espionage during the height of the Second Red Scare. Amid a wave of anti-communist paranoia and what many saw as outright anti-Semitism, the couple was sentenced to death in what came to be dubbed the American Dreyfus Affair, a reference to Alfred Dreyfus, the Jewish-French artillery officer wrongfully convicted of treason. The execution of Ethel Rosenberg in specific was incredibly disgusting given the fact that she seemingly had little to nothing to do with any wrongdoings. In fact, David Greenglass, Ethel's brother, is the one who, shortly before their trial, changed his story and accused his sister of being a co-conspirator. When Greenglass recounted this incident many years later, He admitted that he actually thinks it was his wife who was guilty of co-conspiracy, not his sister Ethel, and he admitted, "My wife is more important to me than my sister." He also felt the need to leave us with this banger, "My wife is my wife. I mean, I don't sleep with my sister, you know?" What a class act this guy was. Anyway, one would think that at a time where Jews were frequently and baselessly accused of being communists, an accusation rooted firmly in historical anti-Semitism, recall the whole Judeo-Bolshevism thing, the ADL would have done something to champion the Rosenbergs' cause. I mean, respected figures and intellectuals from around the world, including Albert Einstein, Pablo Picasso, Jean-Paul Sartre, and even Pope Pius XII, pleaded for their lives, with critics referring to the case as a lynching, arguing that, regardless of the couple's alleged crimes, executing them in a fit of anti-red hysteria rooted in apparent anti-Semitic sentiment would be a crime against humanity. So what did the ADL do? Well, the ADL outright denied that anti-Semitism had anything to do with the case, a surprising stance from a group so quick to brand anyone who criticizes Israel as an anti-Semite. In fact, the ADL even partook in a letter denouncing those seeking justice in the Rosenberg case and argued that they were trying to, quote, inject the false issue of anti-Semitism into this story. Incredibly rich coming from them. To top it all off, then FBI Director and infamous POS J. Edgar Hoover apparently recommended that Ethel Rosenberg be sentenced to 30 years in prison as an appropriate punishment. But Judge Irving Kaufman, an American member of the ADL's Civil Rights Committee who presided over the case, ignored Hoover and outright sentenced Ethel to death. Bro out-eviled J. Edgar Hoover, the guy who worked to get Fred Hampton extrajudicially murdered in his sleep. This period shows a clear pattern. The ADL consistently sided with the U.S. state over politically dissident Jews. Even in the modern day, Jewish civil rights organizations like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace are constantly smeared by the ADL for their unforgivable crime of criticizing Zionism. This loyalty to state power, even when it means betraying its supposed civil rights mission, is a defining characteristic in many ADL scandals. Just as the ADL took a public, ostensible stance against McCarthyism, it also publicly championed civil rights legislation in the 60s. I mean, it was a supporter of the '64 Civil Rights Act, so at least we can clear its name when it comes to the struggle against anti-black racism and place them firmly on the right side of history in that regard, right? Wrong. Just as the ADL was inconsistent, to say the least, in its anti-McCarthyism, so too was it when it came to anti-black racism. For example, back in 1967, the ADL smeared the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, a key figure in the civil rights movement, as I don't even know if I could say this. I'll just throw it up on the screen, read it for yourself. The ADL accused SNCC of being anti-Semitic and said that it was akin to the KKK, all because it published an article opposing Zionism. SNCC even clarified, saying that their issue was never with Jews, but with Zionists who oppress others. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Yes, the ADL supported the '64 Civil Rights Act. Good. They're supposed to be a civil rights organization, for fuck's sake, that's the bare minimum. But they also rallied against and smeared black leadership for decades. Aside from their attacks against SNCC, they also rallied against the Movement for Black Lives and other similar figures. In typical liberal fashion, the ADL does not shy away from condescendingly telling oppressed groups how to resist and shaming them as irresponsible when they opt for methods the ADL disapproves of. To recall its disgust toward the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the ADL's then national chairman said of them, "SNCC is no longer a responsible civil rights group. It tied itself to Chinese, Soviet, and now Arab propaganda machines in the US. I do not think the majority of black people go along. SNCC represents a minuscule minority of black people. Americans generally rejected this kind of extremism, whether it comes from a group like SNCC or one like the Ku Klux Klan. It is an irony that SNCC should tie itself to the Arab cause, because when an Arab country, Saudi Arabia, still maintains slavery." As you can probably tell, this is a tactic still commonly used by liberals today. They pay lip service to an injustice, condescend those who actually fight said injustice, and when convenient, point to another country committing an injustice to deflect from their own. In the modern day, the ADL's racist agenda is showcased through its program that brings American cops and other law enforcement figures to Israel for training. In fact, thanks to our trusty friend the Wayback Machine, we can still access a now deleted 2016 ADL document where they literally bragged that 100% of major U.S. metropolitan police departments have sent participants to ADL's National Counterterrorism Seminar in Israel and ADL's Advanced Training School in Extremist and Terrorist Threats. Look, I'm no policymaker, but all I'm saying is if my country's police have a reputation for being racist assholes, the last place I'm sending them for training is fucking Israel, the genocidal ethno-state that literally legislates ethno-supremacy and conceives of itself as the nation-state for one ethnic group exclusively. This ADL exchange program has been accused of exacerbating the militarization of American police, reinforcing racist stereotypes of Arabs, Muslims, and other people of color, and fueling excessive violence against them. In fact, in the wake of the 2020 murder of George Floyd at the hands of an American cop, a leaked internal memo quoted senior ADL members reflecting on their organization's role in sending American cops to receive training from serial human rights abusers in Israel, and wondering if this was related to increased police brutality at home. Quote, "In light of the very real police brutality at the hands of militarized police forces in the U.S., we must ask ourselves difficult questions, like whether we are contributing to the problem. We must ask ourselves why it is necessary for American police enforcing American laws would need to meet with members of the Israeli military. We must ask ourselves if, upon returning home, those we train are more likely to use force." At the end of the day, the ADL is a fundamentally anti-left organization that couldn't give less of a shit about upholding civil liberties. They are pro-Western imperialism, pro-hyper-militarized police, pro-colonialism, pro-apartheid genocide deniers, and more than fine with racism and ethno-supremacy as long as it benefits their preferred in-group. This often places it in alignment with the right wing, another group it claims to oppose yet has no problem cozying up to when the topic is crushing the left, the only political force that actually threatens its racist imperial ambitions. This accusation is further backed by the ADL's endorsement of multiple Donald Trump executive orders targeting Americans who criticize Israel, particularly students. One of these orders, signed in February 2025, threatens to deport people simply for protesting in support of Palestinian rights. This, alongside the ADL's approval of anti-BDS legislation and its push for increased censorship on social media, urging tech companies to, quote,
knock the anti-Zionists off the platform once and for all,
has drawn the ire of free speech advocates who see these moves as fundamentally incompatible with Americans' First Amendment rights. The ADL will side with whoever it needs to in order to advance its geopolitical goals and prove its loyalty to both the US and Israel, even when that means abandoning its own mission statement. In 1993, a major revelation about the ADL's activities came to light, marking one of the most scandalous moments in the organization's history. It was exposed for running a large-scale illegal spy ring. For over 30 years, the ADL had employed a spy by the name of Roy Bullock to obtain intelligence on individuals and organizations it considered anti-Semitic or hostile to Israel. Bullock had had a history of collaborating with the CIA and the FBI, and even collaborated with a San Francisco Police Department intelligence inspector who is believed to have illegally given him information from confidential police records. When it all came to light, the operation was exposed to be massive. Bullock's database was filled with files on over 12,000 individuals and 950 organizations. And it wasn't just Nazis and white supremacists the ADL was surveilling, even though that's who they claimed Bullock was tasked to keep tabs on. The ADL was spying on a wide array of left-wing figures and organizations ranging from prominent civil rights groups like NAACP, ACLU, and Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, to labor unions, to activists who opposed Reagan's dirty wars in Latin America, to congresspersons, and more. This ADL spy ring even helped spark the 1987 arrests of the Los Angeles Eight, a group of Muslims, 7 Palestinian and 1 Kenyan, who were falsely accused of supporting terrorism and ordered to be expelled from the US. These individuals had their homes raided and were detained without charge or trial. To make things worse, this situation only came to an end relatively recently in 2007 with a judge throwing out the case and referring to it as an embarrassment and a festering wound. Now, you would think that the ADL, who claims to care for the just treatment of all, would have stepped in and denounced this unjust detainment, but they didn't. On the contrary, they played a massive role in the injustice. But the craziest part about this 1993 ordeal was the discovery that the ADL was selling information to foreign governments. Oh, by the way, do you remember the Rosenberg couple we talked about earlier? The ones who the ADL championed the deaths of because they were supposedly working with foreign governments? Kinda hits a little different now. Anyway, Roy Bullock, the ADL-employed spy and federal informant, was selling information on anti-apartheid activists to South African intelligence agents. The ADL was actually regularly sharing confidential intel with the South African Bureau of State Security, the South African Gestapo, as Mark Ames, writing for Pacific Standard, called it. It also came to light that the ADL was spying on Black American congresspersons for the white supremacist South African government, with Bullock eventually telling Los Angeles Times that it wasn't the most political thing to do. That's great. As American journalist and author Sasha Polakow-Saransky pointed out in his book, The Unspoken Alliance, the ADL also has to live with the inconvenient fact that it actively worked against and slandered Nelson Mandela and his ANC while boosting propaganda about them. As the anti-apartheid campaign turned its attention to Israel's links with South Africa, the ADL entered the propaganda fray, publicly attacking Nelson Mandela's ANC with arguments that mirrored those of the hardline security officials in Pretoria. And in case you think that this behavior has been remedied and it's well in the past, you'd be wrong. The ADL still does this shit. In 2020, the ADL was caught spying on Tatiana Rebel, an American activist who opposed the ADL's program of sending American law enforcement for training in Israel. So, not only does the ADL defend and bootlick the current apartheid state of Israel, but it also collaborated with and defended the apartheid state of South Africa. I keep coming back to the same question. For a group that claims to exist to fight anti-Semites and other hateful forces, why are they constantly attacking left-wing groups, anti-fascists, and humanistic figures? Well, to circle back to an excerpt from Polakow-Saransky's book, where he details the mindset of Erwin Saul, the national director of fact-finding for the ADL from 1967 to 1997. By the early 1980s, Saul had come to believe that neo-Nazis and skinheads were no longer a major menace to American Jews or the State of Israel. Instead, he believed that the greatest threat to Israel emanated from the Soviet Union and the American left. As a result, Saul's fact-finding department shifted its focus from white supremacists and Aryan nationalists to every imaginable left-leaning organization in the country, from pro-Nicaraguan Sandinista groups to the anti-apartheid movement. And this sentiment was corroborated by the ADL judge David Rose, who warned back in 1971 that opposition to Israel and to American support for Israel may replace Vietnam as a key issue of the far left. See, it's not about fighting anti-Semitism or fighting racism. It's about defending Israel by fighting those who are fighting racism. And the ADL's tactics and goals haven't changed since. In 2017, as white supremacists were rallying in Charlottesville, Virginia, the ADL urged police to infiltrate and surveil the situation using undercover cops. They even issued a now retracted primer for law enforcement. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, who cares? Fuck those Nazis. But the white supremacists weren't the ones the ADL was primarily concerned with. The ADL advised cops to infiltrate and surveil the anti-racist protesters with the goal of potentially using the intel to prosecute them. Shouldn't a supposed humanistic organization be more concerned with the literal Nazis and not the anti-fascists? In short, the ADL may have started as a civil rights organization but has transformed into a political apparatus built to defend hardline Israeli policy above all else. Armed with immense wealth, bipartisan donors, and deep institutional reach, it doesn't protect marginalized voices, it protects power at their expense. This has led to the deterioration of the ADL's credibility, from Wikipedia editors now considering it an unreliable source, to the magazine Jewish Currents conducting a detailed audit on the ADL and concluding that they are dishonest, ultimately beholden to Israel advocacy, and that their reporting claiming that there's a rise in anti-Semitism is faulty and, quote, skews the data. By weaponizing its moral authority to silence dissent and shape US policy in Israel's favor, the ADL functions as a non-state enforcer of a foreign agenda and little else. But that's not where I want to leave this video. Sure, we can all point and laugh at the ADL, at its corruption and hypocrisy, but I don't find that to be the most interesting takeaway, and that's not why I made this video. I'm also not particularly concerned with why the ADL is so obsessed with Israel. I understand Israel's strategic importance to the US. I also understand the ADL's obsession with cozying up to state power. I also understand the material benefits that the State of Israel offers Jews worldwide at the direct expense of Palestinians. It makes sense why people who benefit from Israel's strategic role in the Middle East and those who find themselves in the in-group that Israel serves would be in favor of it. That's not exactly a revelation. I'd rather ask the question, how did we allow such a corrupt and dishonest organization to become the voice of authority when it comes to civil rights? The signs have been clear for decades. Why the fuck is Greenblatt still invited to CNN, CBS, and all these mainstream media outlets when we've known for decades that his organization is crooked? The uncomfortable reality of the matter is that societally in the West, we tend to operate on a different set of rules when the topic involves Israel or Zionism due to a flawed belief that they are an inextricable part of Jewishness, a topic that we treat as a political third rail. No touching. Now, I absolutely do not deny the historical suffering of Jewish people, and I consider anti-Semites to be repulsive, but I also understand the dynamic created by Western philo-Semitism, where political and media establishments treat any issue connected to Jewish identity with kitty gloves. At the end of the day, people are just people. They can fuck up the same way you or I can, and acting as though an entire group, due solely to their immutable characteristics, is incapable of doing wrong creates fertile ground for opportunistic Zionist supremacists who don't care about the well-being of ordinary Jews and solely care about maintaining their neo-fascist ethno-state to conduct what we've witnessed for the past 2 years in Gaza. Again, when American politicians feel comfortable publicly making bigoted remarks about Muslim Americans and threatening to deport them for no reason, the strand of bigotry that needs our direct attention at the moment is not anti-Semitism. Earlier this year, there was a social media post made by the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum. It showed 6 arms connecting in a circle, depicting solidarity among what I assume were meant to be members of oppressed groups. Another slide mentioned how Jews shouldn't let their history of trauma cloud their judgment when a genocide is being committed by people who cynically claim to have Jewish best interests at heart. I thought this was a thoughtful post, given the genocide of the Palestinians raging on in Gaza and all the genocide denial surrounding it. But then something happened. The LA Holocaust Museum was bombarded by Zionist activists who claimed the post was anti-Semitic for even alluding to the plight of Palestinians. This backlash resulted in the post being deleted and the LA Holocaust Museum issuing an apology. I don't know how else to interpret this situation other than coming to terms with the fact that when we championed the phrase, "never again," in relation to the genocide of Jews at the hands of the Nazis, far too many meant never again, but only for Jews. This is a reality exacerbated not by the anti-Semite, who again is despicable and repugnant, but by the philo-Semite, who treats anything they perceive to be linked to Jewishness as sacred and beyond reproach. We don't treat the other victims of the Holocaust that way. Romani people, Slavic people, we don't champion their right to create an ethno-state in some unrelated land and displace or kill the people living there. Only in the case of Israel do we not only give this a pass, but defend and fund its ability to do so. Again, the Zionists who hide behind Judaism are not an appropriate representation of what it means to be Jewish. Obviously, they are cynical actors who have hijacked Jewish identity to shield their nationalist political project, and when push comes to shove, they will gladly sacrifice Judaism for Zionism. The consequences of Western philo-Semitism, of applying a separate set of rules to Israel and taking Zionist leaders at their word when they claim to act in the interests of Jewish people, are on full display in Gaza. The West cannot be allowed to make up for the shame it feels regarding the Nazi genocide of Jews by facilitating the Israeli genocide of Palestinians. While I'm on the topic and have your attention, my friend Dahlia, who along with her 3 children and husband are survivors of the Gaza genocide, could really use our help. She and her husband are teachers, English and social studies respectively, but due to the immense destruction in Gaza, they obviously are unable to work. Because of this, they are struggling to pay their rent and make ends meet. If you're in a position to help, it would be greatly appreciated. I'll attach her campaign below. If you like this video and want to see an exclusive extended version where I talk about and expose the group's Canary mission and stop anti-Semitism, that is available now for my Tier 1 and up supporters on Patreon. Thank you.